Of the ANC's National Executive Committee meeting, and there has been plenty of drama, as well as hot topics like the suspension of Secretary General Ace Magashule. Yesterday, Magashule and MP Bongani Bongo were kicked out of the virtual meeting. Today, some party members from eThekwini who are not at the NEC, who are not part of the NEC meeting, but nevertheless are calling for the immediate resignation of the entire NEC. Meanwhile, recorded voice notes from the meeting have been leaked online. Joining me now to discuss this is our political analysts Ongama Mtimka and Makhosini Mketwa. Good afternoon to you, gentlemen, and thank you for sparing me some of your time on a Sunday afternoon on Mother's Day. So a few minutes ago, Makhosini, if I may start with you, in conversation with Solima Paila, almost like the Apollo 13, the troubled Apollo 13 mission that had to slingshot around the moon, he suggested to me that actually this NEC, right, this NEC is the one that will save the ANC from, a fate that would have befallen Apollo 13 had they not been able to pull off that maneuver of slingshotting around the moon. This is the NEC, Solima Paila tells me, that will slingshot the ANC onto a path of renewal. Having seen and heard what you've seen and heard, are you convinced? All right. Ongama Mtimka, we seem to have a bit of a challenge with Makhosini there. Let me throw the question to you. What do you think?
So I missed that latter part.
So I was saying, Solima Paila was saying to me about 20 minutes or so ago that this is the NEC that will finally slingshot the ANC onto its path of renewal. Much talked about. We were talking about it in 2017 already. He says, actually, this is a nice contradiction because the contradictions deepens the prospects of renewal. Actions that they had been calling for a long time are finally being taken. Are you convinced, having seen and heard what you've seen and heard from the NEC over these last few days?
Sure. As far as the power configurations at the NEC, the top six and the NWC, it seems pretty clear to me, Tulas, that the arrangement is going to work, that this NEC is committed to following through with the renewal project. Now, my challenge is that once a stalwart like President Mbeki starts evoking the nostalgic past and the unity of the ANC, if that clip is anything to go by, it is very easy to kind of trigger those emotive commitments to the ANC as it exists in people's minds and hearts, as opposed to the cancerous organization which must be allowed to die now so that it can rebuild. So the next aspect of this renewal is going to be how the NEC leads the process of modernizing voting for leaders within the party, as well as processes that are followed when it comes to that. And lastly, how it's going to prevent those who are facing all those things that are stated in Rule 25 of the ANC, not just being formally charged, from assuming office. Because now it's doing damage control, but we're hearing nothing to us about what is being done to prevent, for example, in this past regional conference that happened in the Northern Cape over the past weekend. Are we clear? Are we happy that everybody who emerged out of that conference does not have anything which is going to see them charged in the next few months? So the point I'm making is part of the work is the responsive work of dealing with what the ANC currently has. But a majority of it has to do with precisely why people place so much reliance on an early conference. the ability to manipulate structures so that whatever desired outcome by whatever grouping of elites is carried out.
Bongani, we will talk about the calls for an early conference and the dissolution of the NEC in just a moment, but let me bring in Makhosini Mgitwa into this conversation. Makhosini, I'm sure you've been watching with great interest, like all of us, the goings on at the ANC's National Executive Committee meeting. What do you think? There have been suggestions that President Cyril Ramaphosa has been tackled and challenged by people such as Dakota Legoete on the question of whether or not he's championing in earnest the project of renewal and unity, or is he a president of a faction? But also what we saw around the Secretary General, who insists that he remains the Secretary General, being kicked out of the Zoom meeting. Now the existential question being asked by Thabo Mbeki through another NEC member to say, is there still an organization in the true sense of an organization that is called the African National Congress? What have you made of it all?
Good afternoon, Tulasizwe, and apologies for the cut earlier on. I think what we sometimes overlook is the fact that the ANC has overachieved in two respects. The first respect, it is in its capacity as a ruling party that it has been able to hold on to power for the past 27 years, regardless of what it does. And also another way in which it has overachieved, it is in terms of its longevity as a political formation, the oldest on the continent. And due to that, we sometimes overlook the fact that at some point, this whole thing will come to an end. The ANC will split eventually. The ANC will lose power eventually. We just do not know when. And when we compare it with its sister liberation movements in Southern Africa, it hasn't been in power for that long, and maybe that may cloud our judgment. But I think in the South African context, if you look at the ANC, how it has done, it is very, I can say confidently, without any fear of contradiction, that its best years are in the rearview mirror. Both as a liberation movement, as a ruling party. In 2004, it garnered close to 70% of the vote, and it's been downhill from there. Now, if you look at the two factions that were forced into an inconvenient marriage by the 2017 conference, they don't like each other, they don't have anything in common, and they were forced into this very awkward coalition government to share power together. And President Cyril Ramaphosa made a very deliberate choice that he's not going to use the fact that he's president, he's not going to be triumphalist in his approach. Instead, he'll try and coalesce the entire ANC around him. He's tried that for the past 3 years, and I think now it's getting to a head. I think we may see a split in the ANC, or we may have a very bruising conference next year. Because another thing that may be proved to be a problem for President Ramaphosa, it is the forthcoming local government election. Now, if you look at what is coming out of the Zondo Commission and what we read in the newspapers and what we see on television every day, there is a serious problem of corruption within the ANC, and voters may decide to punish in the local government election, which may create all sorts of problems for President Cyril. However, there may be a saving grace in that there is quite an implosion at the DA, which seems to be getting detached from its voter base, but we will have to see how it turns out.
Ongama, you raised the specter of an early conference, right, as being one of the calls being made. Already we're hearing some branches, and it's always important to add the qualification some, because, hardly anyone speaks for the collective these days, right? Because you'll have a region that has many, many branches, and some branches will say, nevertheless, in eThekwini, some branches saying that the entire NEC must actually resign, which would perhaps, I suppose, bring about an early conference. That's hardly surprising. In terms of how that would play out, juxtaposed with the divisions in the leadership, how does that translate to what's the state of the ANC at branch level, looking at that prospect of an early conference?
Sure. That's the point I was making earlier on, Tulas, that one, so in an ANC conference, once credentials are accepted, it's already known which direction the conference is going to go. That is because there's a membership culture. There's a culture of recruiting members who belong more to people and their factions than they do to the organization, which is why I was saying the renewal would be incomplete if what the ANC Eastern Cape raised before NASREC, and I don't know where it went after the conference, that part of the reform that needs to happen is to get the entire membership of the ANC to vote as opposed to the 500 people, the number of the 500 that attends a conference. Why? Because it is easier to buy that 500 than it is to buy an entire membership base. So that reform has not been done as far as I understand. What appears to have been prioritized to some degree is to at least automate the database of membership. But that too doesn't seem to have been so thoroughgoing that the party can confidently say that it now controls its entire membership databases on the basis of members in good standing, not as determined by an audit process that wants to fashion outcomes in branches and regions and provinces in its own fashion, but rather one that on the basis of the database itself, mining information from there, it is, it's determined. So that's where the crux of the work is. The second thing, Tulas, is that the NEC, you mentioned the local government elections. What stopped them from boldly saying, here are our guidelines in terms of who is going to become councillors? They did it in 2016 by coming up with a framework of through the eye of the needle, but there was no correlation between the documents that were sent and distributed to the branches and the process itself of electing leaders. So documents were received, but there was no saying, before we vote on these nominees, let us first check how do they fare against the criteria that has been given, and then eliminate them before the voting takes place, so that at the level, when it comes to voting, you only vote for those which are in line with what the guidelines are as far as the aspirational values of the party and the criteria for.
So if we take a step back then, Makhosini, if I come back to you, step back from the deeper policy and existential questions that we've been traversing in the last few minutes, and talk now about just the drama of it all, right? Just the drama of the day. If Nelson Mandela, as president of the ANC, faced off to a certain extent with Bantu Holomisa, with the result that Holomisa was the name that most people were talking about going into the last conference that Mandela was the president of the ANC. If Thabo Mbeki faced off with the dynamics of a Jacob Zuma, and now Cyril Ramaphosa is dealing with the dynamics of an Ace Magashule. What have you made of that dynamic in the last 2-3 days or so? The conduct of Ace Magashule, what have you read into that? And also the challenges that we are told have been happening on Cyril Ramaphosa inside the NEC, but also his lieutenant's response to those challenges.
Very well put, let me put it to you this way. You see, the ANC right now is facing a difficult problem of how it's going to proceed from this, because it is now a party that has grown two heads. You have Cyril Ramaphosa on one hand, you have Ace Magashule on the other. Now, for many people or many politicians, the fact that he was charged with such serious charges, one would have expected that he would keep his head down, go and try and fight those allegations in court. But he has decided to take the route that was followed by Jacob Zuma several years ago. Now, in order for you, I'm talking now as a political consultant, in order for you to win the presidency of the ANC and to win the presidency of the country, you have to be carried by the media. Either they carry you as a hero or they carry you as a villain, but they have to carry you. Like the media carried Donald Trump in 2016. Amid all the scandals and all the bad publicity, he still won. So if you look at social media, for instance, how people are responding to Ace Magashule, they see Ace Magashule as the person who is not only able but prepared and actually standing up to Cyril Ramaphosa. Cyril Ramaphosa may be popular amongst certain people, but he's not a universally popular president like Nelson Mandela was. There are people who are opposed to Cyril Ramaphosa for a number of reasons. They think that he's more towards the so-called white monopoly capital, etc. So it could very well be that going to conference in 2022, that there may be a serious challenge coming from the faction of Ace Magashule, though I don't think that, you know, the way the situation is at the moment, they would have a good chance of winning. But after that conference, it is likely that you can find other people saying, okay, we tried to challenge this man internally inside the ANC, but we failed. Let's go outside. That's why I think that a split in the ANC right now is not something that's too far off.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate your insights on this Sunday afternoon. That's Makhosini Mgitwa and Ongama Mtimka weighing in on the situation in the ANC. I do hope that in my historical parallels that I was drawing all the way to, I think it was in Stellenbosch, was it? The last conference that Nelson Mandela was the president of the ANC. Anyway, I was still quite a young man back then, and I remember the delegates singing about Holomisa. Holomisa has done this, Holomisa has done that, etc., etc. Those are the parallels I was trying to draw. You're watching Upfront on eNCA.